As the elevator doors slid shut with a soft ding, Nathan Cole stood still for a moment, staring at his own reflection in the polished steel. At just 34, he was the face of a tech empire worth billions, praised, feared, and envied in equal measure. But tonight, the man reflected back at him bore no resemblance to the iconic CEO who once graced the cover of Forbes. The sharp Armani suit had been replaced with a wrinkled polo shirt and bargain store khakis. His hair, usually styled with calculated precision, was deliberately tousled. The Patek Philippe that had once whispered of power and legacy now sat forgotten in a drawer, swapped out for a cheap plastic digital watch that beeped every hour. An hourly reminder that he was someone else now. Someone invisible. Nathan pressed the button for the 15th floor, home to the operations core of Cole Technologies, a building that bore his name. But tonight, he didn't walk in as its founder. He walked in as a stranger, a temp worker, just another body in the after-hours machinery of a sleepless company. For 6 months, internal surveys had painted a disturbing picture. Morale was plummeting, productivity was down double digits, and whispers of mass resignations had trickled all the way to the boardroom. The consultants were baffled. HR had no answers, and Nathan, once a firm believer that data could solve anything, was left staring at an uncomfortable truth. Numbers don't capture the soul of a company. So he did what no board of directors would ever sign off on, and what no MBA course would ever teach. He went undercover. Disguised as a temp worker, he returned to his own company to see it through the eyes of those who made it run when the lights dimmed and the C-seat had long gone home. "Remember," he whispered to himself as the elevator hummed upward. "You're Nathan Collins, not Cole." Tonight, he was no one special. Just another man trying to survive in a city that didn't care who you used to be. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped into a world he'd only known through spreadsheets and filtered reports. Rows upon rows of cubicles stretched like a maze under flickering fluorescent lights. The air smelled of stale coffee and worn-out toner cartridges. For the first time, Nathan truly felt the distance between his office upstairs and the lives being lived down here. "You're the new guy, right?" The voice came from behind him, dry, a little tired but not unkind. He turned and found himself looking into the eyes of a middle-aged woman with years etched into the soft lines of her face. "I'm Sandra. I manage the night shift. You'll be handling data entry, some filing, nothing too fancy." Nathan gave a small, nervous smile, fully immersed in his role. "Thanks for giving me a shot. I really need this job." Her features softened, her voice almost motherly. "Don't we all, sweetheart? Don't we all?" The first few hours passed like a slow drizzle, cold, colorless, and steady. Nathan immersed himself in tasks he'd never thought twice about. Alphabetizing invoices, inputting client data, answering phones with the kind of politeness he hadn't used since college. His hands fumbled awkwardly at times, but his eyes were always alert, watching, listening, and what he heard was sobering. Conversations over vending machine coffee told a story no executive summary ever had. Workers frustrated with outdated equipment, fears of layoffs, a growing sense of invisibility. During one break, he overheard a comment that hit like a gut punch. "I don't think the big boss even knows we exist," a woman named Maria sighed. "They say he's some tech genius, but when's the last time he came down here and talked to us like we mattered?" Nathan kept his head down, pretending to review paperwork, but every word carved into him. Had he really become that distant, that blind to the very people who built the engine of his success? As the night wore on, the floor grew quieter. The daytime workers had long gone, leaving behind only the shadows and a skeleton crew. But Nathan didn't want to leave, partly because he was fascinated. This was the version of his company he'd never seen. But more truthfully, he was in no rush to return to his sprawling penthouse. where silence echoed off floor-to-ceiling windows and no one waited up for him. And that's when he noticed the janitor. The man moved through the rows of cubicles with quiet efficiency, emptying bins, wiping surfaces with the kind of methodical care that spoke of years, maybe decades of repetition. He looked to be in his late 60s with a crown of silver hair and warm, intelligent eyes behind delicate wire-rimmed glasses. There was something about his posture, back straight, steps measured, that hinted at an old military discipline, the dignity of someone who, no matter his title, had once commanded respect. "Evening," the man said, his voice smooth and low, like a well-worn vinyl record. Nathan looked up, surprised by the gentleness in the greeting. "Evening," he replied, setting his keyboard aside. "Working late, huh?" the janitor offered with a half-smile, revealing slightly yellowed but impeccably clean teeth. "Same here. This building doesn't clean itself." He paused, his eyes locking onto Nathan's with uncanny perception. "You're new?" It wasn't a question, and Nathan felt a flicker of discomfort. There was something in the man's gaze that felt knowing. "Yeah. First day. Name's Nathan Collins." "Raymond Clark," the janitor said, extending a rough, calloused hand. "Everyone just calls me Mr. Clark." The handshake was firm, unshakably real, the kind of grip that told you everything about a man before he even spoke. "Well, Nathan," Mr. Clark said, with a soft smile that hinted at something deeper. "Welcome to the night shift." There was something oddly reassuring in the way he said it, like the world hadn't quite given up on you yet. And from that night on, Nathan found himself looking forward to their brief exchanges. Mr. Clark carried himself with a quiet grace that stood in stark contrast to the sterile environment around them. He spoke in a manner that was thoughtful, articulate, dropping the occasional insight about technology or business that hinted at an intellect far beyond his role. He never once asked Nathan about his background, but in the spaces between their words, he offered something more valuable: wisdom, lessons wrapped in small talk, reminders that dignity didn't come from job titles, but from how you carried yourself in the world. Mr. Clark never asked Nathan about his past, not directly. Instead, he offered quiet philosophies about perseverance, kindness, and the ability to see the human in everyone, no matter their role or status. "Been working here for decades," he said one evening as he wiped down the desks near Nathan's station. "And I've seen a lot of people come and go. Success doesn't always follow the smartest or the most ambitious. It finds those who remember who they are and why they started." Nathan froze. His eyes remained fixed on the monitor, but his thoughts had drifted far away. "That sounds like experience talking," he said, his voice softer than usual. Mr. Clark paused for a beat, then resumed wiping the desk slowly, deliberately. "Everyone has a story, son," he replied quietly. "Some just take longer to tell." On the fifth night, everything changed. The summer storm that had loomed over the city all day finally erupted just after 9 p.m. A jagged bolt of lightning split the sky, its electric brilliance illuminating the entire office floor in a white flash, followed instantly by a thunderclap so fierce it seemed to shake the building's foundation. The lights flickered twice, then went out. The 15th floor was swallowed by darkness. Emergency lights blinked on, casting a red, eerie glow across the cubicles, turning the familiar office into something that felt more like a theater stage set for a suspense drama. The few remaining employees packed up quickly, eager to beat the storm home. Nathan stayed behind. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the rain pound against the glass in furious waves, as though the city itself was having an emotional breakdown. Something about the storm mirrored the turmoil inside him, loud, relentless, and impossible to ignore. "Embers out across the whole district," came Mr. Clark's voice from the shadows. Nathan turned, The older man's silhouette emerged under the emergency lights, moving with a calmness that didn't match the chaos outside. "Guess I'll have to walk home," Nathan muttered. "Where do you live?" Mr. Clark asked, slipping into his weathered coat and lifting a faded canvas bag onto his shoulder. "Downtown, a little over 2 miles, give or take." The truth was, Nathan had planned to call his driver, but staying in character was essential now. He was still Nathan Collins, the temp, the nobody. "I'm headed in the opposite direction," Mr. Clark said after a moment's hesitation. "But it's not far. I could walk part of the way with you. Streets get rough when the lights go out." Nathan opened his mouth to decline, but another crack of thunder exploded overhead, followed by a fresh torrent of wind and rain slamming against the glass. The storm itself seemed to whisper, "Don't go alone." "In that case, I'd really appreciate the company," Nathan replied. Already they made their way down 15 flights of stairs in near total darkness. Their footsteps echoed off the cold concrete walls, rhythmic and steady, like the pulse of a story just beginning to reveal its truth. Outside, the city felt unfamiliar, even alien. Streetlights were out. Intersections blinked with nothing but the occasional flash of lightning or passing headlights cutting through the downpour. And under that moody electric sky, Mr. Clark began to talk. He spoke of places he'd seen, worn cobblestones in Berlin, sleepy coffee shops tucked in back alleys of Kyoto. He painted pictures with his words, stories of cultures, of quiet corners of the world where time seemed to move slower, where people still sat and listened to each other. Nathan listened, enthralled, and then, almost involuntarily, wondered aloud, with all that experience, all that knowledge, why are you doing this job? I hope I'm not being too forward," Nathan added quickly as they sidestepped a broken tree branch lying across the sidewalk. There was a long pause. So long, in fact, Nathan began to wonder if he'd overstepped. "I used to be an engineer," Mr. Clark said finally, voice low and reflective. "Systems design, back when that still meant something." "What made you change careers?" Another pause, this one deeper. He didn't answer immediately, and when he did, his voice carried the weight of a lesson long since learned. "Sometimes life veers off course, son, and when it does, what matters most is how you respond." They walked in silence after that, the only sound the splash of their shoes in the pooling water and the rain that poured down like a curtain between the city and the sky. About 20 minutes later, they stopped in front of a modest 2-story home nestled in an older neighborhood. Built in the 1940s, the house was small but well kept. A weathered swing hung from the porch, and even in the dark, Nathan could make out the meticulous care in the flower beds lining the walkway. "Sid, this is me," Mr. Clark said. "You sure you'll be okay walking the rest of the way?" Nathan was about to nod when another blinding bolt of lightning sliced across the clouds, and the heavens opened up with a ferocity that drenched them both within seconds. "Come inside," Mr. Clark offered, already reaching for the door. "Get dry. I'll put on some coffee. Wait out the worst of it." Nathan hesitated. Stepping into the home of an employee felt like crossing a line. He had spent his entire life building boundaries between himself and the people who worked for him. But in the downpour and in the unwavering sincerity of Mr. Clark's eyes, the offer felt less like hospitality and more like something rare in his world, genuine concern. "If you're sure it's no trouble." "None at all. Come in before we both catch pneumonia." Mr. Clark's home was exactly as Nathan had imagined. Simple, clean, and filled with the quiet presence of a life fully lived. The sofa was old but cared for. The bookshelves lined with engineering manuals, classic novels, tiny model airplanes, and photographs from all over the world. The space didn't radiate wealth, but it whispered something stronger: depth and devotion. "Make yourself comfortable," Mr. Clark called from the kitchen. "Coffee's on." Nathan wandered through the living room, taking everything in with a curiosity that bordered on reverence. The photos drew him in, some with people who looked like former colleagues, others of places too far-flung to guess. But it was the photograph on the mantel that stopped him cold. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks. The frame was plain silver, something you could buy in any department store. But inside was a group of children gathered at what looked like a picnic or community fair, and in the front row center, seated with Mike, was a boy who looked exactly like Nathan had at 10 years old. Not similar, identical. His hands trembling, Nathan reached for the frame. The boy had his same dark hair, the same solemn expression, even the same faint scar above the left eyebrow. One Nathan had earned crashing a bike behind the group home when he was 9. It didn't make sense. How could a photograph of him from decades ago be sitting on the mantel of a janitor he'd only met a few days ago? Before he could think, before he could breathe, a voice came from directly behind him. "Find something interesting?" Nathan spun around, still holding the frame. Mr. Clark stood in the doorway holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee, but the warmth was gone from his face. The twinkle in his eyes had vanished, replaced by a sorrowful stillness, resignation, and something like pain. "Mr. Clark," Nathan's voice cracked. "Why do you have a picture of me as a child?" Mr. Clark walked over calmly and placed the mugs on the table. His movements were careful, unshaken. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft tapping of rain against the windows. "That's not you," he said quietly, but his voice faltered on the lie. "Just a boy who reminded me of someone." Nathan turned back to the photo. His heart pounded. This wasn't a vague resemblance. This was him. The scar, the cowlick on his left side, his foster mother could never tame. Even the slight slouch in the boy's shoulders. "No, that's me," Nathan whispered. "The scar. I got that when I was 9. I remember it. Sunshine Group Home." Mr. Clark lowered himself into his favorite armchair. The moment he sat, he seemed smaller somehow, like a man suddenly carrying the full weight of the years he'd lived. "Sunshine Group Home," he repeated, barely audible. "Haven't heard that name in over 20 years. Nathan's mind reeled. Sunshine had been his entire world from age 7 to 18. The place that took him in after the fire that stole his parents. It had closed down years ago when the state cut funding for smaller foster facilities. "You knew it?" Nathan stepped closer. "How? Why?" Mr. Clark looked up, and in that moment, his eyes no longer belonged to a janitor. They belonged to a man holding secrets, secrets that were finally ready to be told. "Sit down, son," he said quietly. This is more complicated than you think." "And you never suspected anything?" Mr. Clark asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Of course I did," Nathan replied, eyes distant. "But Ms. Henderson, the center director, told me the donor wanted to remain anonymous. All I was told was that he was a successful businessman who'd once been an orphan himself." Mr. Clark stood quietly for a moment, then walked over to a weathered filing cabinet beside his desk. He pulled open a drawer, took out a worn manila folder, and placed it gently on the table in front of Nathan. Inside was a collection of documents that seemed to breathe with age and memory. Bank statements, scholarship forms, voided checks, and a stack of handwritten letters. Nathan's letters. Every thank you note he had written to the anonymous donor over the years. Nathan reached for the top letter with trembling hands. His throat tightened as he read his own words from a different lifetime. "Dear anonymous benefactor, I want to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to go to college. This semester I'm taking advanced systems design, and I absolutely love it." He looked up, overwhelmed. You kept all of these? For 15 years? Not a single one missing, Mr. Clark said softly, a quiet sadness glimmering in his eyes. Nathan collapsed into the nearest armchair, the strength leaving his legs. Memories and half-truths flooded in like a tide. As he pieced together the fragments of his past, an aching clarity took shape. ALA scholarships, the programming camps, the book stipends, that was you. The funding was funneled through something called the RC Educational Foundation, Mr. Clark explained gently. I created the foundation to support kids from Sunshine, but you were the only one I followed all the way through college and beyond. But why me? Nathan's voice cracked, his composure unraveling. Why did you choose me? Mr. Clark sat down again, both hands wrapped around his mug, as if drawing warmth from it. After my son passed, I couldn't stand being around children, he said quietly. Everything reminded me of David, but then volunteering at Sunshine helped me feel like maybe, just maybe, I could honor his memory by helping other kids who'd lost something too. Nathan's heart twisted. You volunteered there? For 3 years, Mr. Clark nodded. I helped with homework, taught computer skills. I tried to be the role model I wished my son could have had if he'd lived. His voice softened. But you stood out. You were different. Quiet, observant, always asking how things worked, never just accepting, always digging for the why. I don't remember you, Nathan whispered, as if trying to summon the face through fog. I should remember someone like you. I went by Ray back then, Mr. Clark said gently. Ray Clark. And you? You had just lost your whole world. You were 7. I never expected you to remember. Then, leaning forward, his gaze locked onto Nathan's. But I remembered you. The way you sat alone in the corner, flipping through old electronics magazines, trying to figure out how radios worked. The way you fixed the library computer, that tiny machine. The computer, Nathan gasped. When I was 8, you helped me fix Ms. Henderson's computer. And for the first time since the photograph had been discovered, Mr. Clark smiled. A soft, genuine smile full of memory and quiet pride. You were so proud when it booted up again, he said. You told me you wanted to fix everything that was broken. And in that moment, I think you started with me. Nathan's voice broke. My whole journey, college, career, the company, it all began with you. No, Mr. Clark said, his tone firm yet kind. It began with your own potential. I just opened a few doors. You were the one who walked through them. Nathan looked at the man who had shaped his life from the shadows, emotion rising like a tide that threatened to drown him. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why let me believe I was helped by some faceless stranger? The best kind of help, Mr. Clark said softly, is the kind that doesn't leave someone feeling indebted. You needed to build your life not because you owed someone, but because you deserved to. He paused, eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. Besides, I was never meant to be part of your success story. I just made sure you had a story to tell. Outside, the storm had quieted to a soft, steady rain tapping against the window pane. But inside that modest living room, the air was thick with revelations that had waited a lifetime to be spoken aloud. Nathan sat still, unmoving, like a man who had just witnessed his past collapsing and rebuilding itself all at once. He stared at the man who had stood silently at every turning point in his life. Every scholarship, every summer program, even his first job, pulling invisible strings with unwavering faith. I need to understand, Nathan said at last, his voice deliberate, still balancing the persona of Nathan Collins, even as the truth burned inside him. You said you had a son. What happened to him? For a moment, Mr. Clark's face tensed. Nathan worried he had pushed too far. But then, without a word, Mr. Clark rose, walked to the bookshelf, and retrieved a simple photo frame. He handed it to Nathan. Inside was a picture of a bright-eyed boy, maybe 12, with the same spark in his eyes that Mr. Clark carried, and a smile so wide it seemed to light up the whole frame. "David," Mr. Clark said, voice thick. "He would have been 42 this year, but leukemia took him from me when he was just 13. Nathan stared at the photograph. There was something in the boy's eyes, intensity, curiosity, that strange mix of innocence and wisdom that struck him like déjà vu. "Looks brilliant," Nathan said quietly. Mr. Clark nodded. He took apart everything just to see how it worked, always asking questions, just like you. He wanted to be an engineer, like his father. We used to spend hours in the garage building model airplanes, talking about engines and how computers process information. He touched the frame gently, as if trying to hold on to the boy one last time. "When he died." His voice faltered, but he forced himself to continue. "I couldn't look at kids without seeing him. My wife, she needed a new start, but I needed to stay close to his memory." "That's why you started volunteering at Sunshine?" Nathan asked softly. He nodded. "My therapist suggested it. Said helping children might give David's death some meaning. At first, it hurt. Every laugh, every question was like a blade. But then, I met a quiet boy who'd just lost his parents in a fire." "That was me," Nathan whispered, his voice cracking. "You were different," Mr. Clark said with a tender smile. "While the other kids played or watched TV, you sat alone, poring over old tech magazines. The way you looked at broken things, not with frustration, but with a fierce desire to understand, to repair. You never gave up. And David would have liked you." "So you helped me because I reminded you of your son?" Nathan asked, not accusing, just trying to grasp the depth of it. "At first," Mr. Clark admitted, "but the more time I spent with you, the more I realized you weren't David. You were you. Brilliant, curious, driven, and unlike David, you had no one to nurture that. I just didn't want you to be forgotten." Nathan leaned forward, gazing into the weathered face that had watched over him from a distance for so long. "But why never tell me, even when I graduated, even after I built the company?" Mr. Clark fell quiet. His fingers traced absent-minded patterns on the side table. "Because I was afraid," he said finally. "Afraid of what?" "I feel like you owed me, that you'd think your success wasn't entirely yours. Or worse, that I was some old man trying to live off the glow of someone else's accomplishments." Nathan felt a sudden flare of anger. But he didn't know if it was directed at Mr. Clark or the cruel silence of fate itself. "So you let me live 15 years not knowing the truth," he said, voice low. "Writing letters to a ghost, thanking someone who never replied." "I did reply," Mr. Clark said softly. "Every semester. I wrote back. I just never sent them." He reached into the filing cabinet again, this time pulling out a second folder, thicker than the first. He placed it before Nathan. Inside were letters, neatly stacked, each beginning with the same words. "Dear Nathan." Nathan picked up the top one and began to read. "Dear Nathan, your letter about the advanced programming class brought tears to my eyes. The way you wrote about algorithms reminded me so much of David when he used to talk about model airplanes. I'm so proud of you, and I hope that one day you'll understand that everything you've achieved came from you." Nathan's hands trembled as he held the letter, one that had never been sent. Its paper was slightly yellowed, soft at the folds, but the ink still carried the weight of truth. "Why didn't you ever send these?" he whispered, the question barely audible. Mr. Clark stared at the letters for a moment before answering, his voice slow and deliberate. Because I knew, if I did, you'd want to meet me. You'd probably invite me to your graduation, maybe even your wedding one day. You'd feel like you owed me something, like you had a responsibility to take care of the old man who once helped you. He lowered his gaze. But I never needed your gratitude, Nathan. I only ever wanted your freedom. Nathan looked at him, eyes searching. But you took a job at my company, he said softly, still clinging to the character of Nathan Collins, though the illusion was thinning. You work for Cole Technologies. You had to know there was a chance you'd see me again. There was a flicker in Mr. Clark's eyes, subtle but unmistakable, the kind of flicker that said, I've known all along. I took the job because I wanted to see the company you'd built. I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become, but I never intended to reach out. I just wanted to be nearby. And what did you see? Nathan asked, his voice unguarded now for the first time. I saw a brilliant man, Mr. Clark said, pausing, a man who had created something extraordinary. But I also saw someone deeply alone, someone who may have lost something vital in the pursuit of greatness. The words landed like stones in Nathan's chest. He thought about his penthouse apartment, so quiet it echoed, the strained connections, the boardroom conversations that lacked soul, the numbness he'd grown used to calling leadership. Do you think I forgot who I was? He asked, not in defense, but in quiet confession. I think, Mr. Clark said gently, you spent so many years trying to prove you were worthy that you forgot you always were. His voice was soft, like dust on an old piano key. That little boy who helped the younger kids with homework, who fixed broken machines just to see the joy on someone's face. He deserved every opportunity life gave him, not because he earned them, but because he mattered. Nathan pressed his hand to his chest, where his heart thudded, slow and aching. For so long he'd lived to validate himself to an invisible force, and now, sitting across from the man who had been that force all along, he felt the foundations of his identity shift. I don't even know what to think anymore, he admitted quietly. Mr. Clark leaned forward, a gentle smile playing on his lips. It's not that the picture has changed, son. It's just, now you finally see the whole thing. And then, like a storm breaking inside him, Nathan stood up. The weight of the false name, the fake persona, it became too heavy to carry a second longer. Mr. Clark, his voice quavered slightly, I haven't been honest with you. Mr. Clark's gaze didn't waver, but something in his posture softened, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Go ahead, he said calmly. Nathan drew a long, slow breath. He knew this would change everything. My name isn't Nathan Collins. I'm Nathan Cole, CEO of Cole Technologies. The room went silent. The only sound was the slow, methodical ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the corner. Mr. Clark didn't speak. He didn't even blink. He just stared out the window, where the city lights were slowly flickering back on as the power returned. Then finally, in a voice no louder than a whisper, he said, I know. Nathan felt the air leave his lungs. What? What did you say? Mr. Clark turned away from the window and looked directly at him. Known since your second night on the job, did you really think I wouldn't recognize the little boy I'd watched grow up from behind the scenes just because he got older? Nathan felt the ground tilt beneath him. But why didn't you say anything? Why let me keep pretending to be someone else? Mr. Clark stepped closer, his expression unreadable. Because I was curious too, he said quietly. Why would Nathan Cole, a billionaire, a tech mogul, be working the night shift under a false name in his own building? What was he trying to find that his corner office couldn't give him? The question hung between them like a mirror, and Nathan saw his reflection in it clearly. Stripped of title, stripped of pride, just a man trying to remember what it meant to be human. "You knew, and you still treated me like just another guy," Nathan murmured. "Because that's what I needed." "For the first time in a long time," Mr. Clark said, "someone saw you not for your name, or your net worth, or your influence, but for your presence. And maybe you needed that more than anything." He paused. "Do you remember the last time you had a real conversation with someone? One where they weren't trying to impress you, sell you something, or ask for a favor?" Nathan couldn't answer. He couldn't even remember. Every connection he had, every colleague, every acquaintance, was soaked in status. Everyone wanted something. No one just was. "How long have you worked at Cole Technologies?" Nathan asked. 3 years, Mr. Clark replied. "I took the job after retiring from my engineering consultancy. I told people it was to kill time, but truthfully, I wanted to see what you had built. I wanted to know the man you'd become." Nathan looked at him, heart thudding. "And what did you see?" Mr. Clark walked to a shelf and pulled out a thick binder, one Nathan hadn't noticed before. Inside were articles, clippings, and printed pages, dozens of them. Headlines about Nathan, about Cole Technologies, about the rise of a man from foster care to Forbes. "I saw a man who'd gone further than any dream I ever had for him," Mr. Clark said, showing him a headline. "The tech prodigy disrupting cloud infrastructure from orphan to Fortune 500 CEO," and another. "Nathan Cole, the youngest CEO on Time's most influential list." He looked up, his eyes searching Nathan's soul. "But I also saw a man who'd lost connection to people." The words hit Nathan with the force of truth. "That's not fair," he said softly. "I worked myself into the ground for this company." "No one denies that," Mr. Clark replied with compassion. "But success without connection is just a sophisticated form of loneliness." He leaned in. "I watched you these past nights. As Nathan Collins, you were present. You listened. You cared. You were the man I always hoped you'd become." Nathan shook his head. "But I can't keep that up. A CEO can't be everyone's friend. There have to be boundaries, systems. People expect leadership, not friendship." Mr. Clark returned to his seat, his voice calm but firm. "Do you remember what you told me that second night? That a great leader is someone who remembers where he came from?" Then his eyes narrowed. "So, Nathan, where did you come from?" The question struck like lightning. Nathan swallowed hard. "I came from nothing," he said bitterly. "I was just a lucky orphan." "No," Mr. Clark said, voice unwavering. "You came from a place where people looked out for each other, not because they were paid to, but because they understood loss. A place where older kids tutored the younger ones, where pain didn't make people bitter, it made them kind." He leaned forward, his voice barely more than a whisper. "That's not nothing, son, that's everything." Nathan felt his vision blur with heat. "I tried to remember that. We have a charitable foundation, strong benefits." "Charity is writing a check," Mr. Clark cut in, not unkindly, but with unmistakable conviction. "What I'm talking about is presence. It's knowing the names of the janitors, the receptionists, the ones who keep the lights on while you're busy chasing shareholders." He paused. "It's remembering that your success was built on the faith of others, just like mine was in you." Nathan's voice cracked as he replied, "That faith, it started everything." "Not just mine," Mr. Clark corrected gently. "It was the belief of every teacher who stayed late to tutor you, every counselor who saw your potential, every friend who didn't walk away, and every employee who still believes in the vision you created." Nathan closed his eyes. He saw Sandra, the weary yet compassionate night supervisor. He saw Maria, who wondered if the man at the top even knew they existed. He heard again the late-night whispers of invisible people, propping up a system that had long since forgotten them. "I lost that connection," Nathan admitted quietly. "I thought success meant separation, that leadership had to come with distance." Mr. Clark gave him a sad smile. "Some of the best leaders I've ever known worked with their people, not just above them, and they were never any less respected for it." Nathan glanced around the humble living room, every inch infused with the quiet dignity of a life lived with intention. "So you took a janitor's job at my company to teach me a lesson?" Mr. Clark let out a soft laugh, his first of the night. "No, son. I just wanted to see you. To see the boy I once knew become the man I always hoped he'd grow into. I never imagined I'd end up working beside you, emptying trash cans, filing papers, but I wouldn't trade it." Nathan's voice dropped to a whisper. "So what now? Now that we both know the truth?" Mr. Clark stood slowly and extended his calloused hand, the same hand that had greeted Nathan that very first night. "Now, we decide what to do with it." 3 days later, Nathan sat in his corner office, staring out at the skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The phones rang incessantly, emails stacked up on his screen, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. The experiment was over, but the real work had just begun. Mr. Clark's words echoed in his mind. "Success without connection is just organized loneliness." There was a knock at the door. Jennifer, his assistant, stepped in holding a folder, her face carrying a certain tension. "The board wants to see you in 10 minutes, she said, laying the documents on his desk. "Fourth quarter cost reduction strategy." Nathan blinked. He had nearly forgotten the quarterly review where department heads pitched budget cuts. "Anything major?" he asked, voice raw. Jennifer hesitated. "Facilities has proposed cutting janitorial staff by 30%, switching to an outside vendor. Projected savings around $800,000, 0 cents annually." Nathan felt the blood drain from his face. "Do you have the list of employees affected?" She flipped a page. As she began to read names, Nathan stopped listening after the second one. Raymond Clark. Later that day, Nathan stood before the board of directors and senior leadership team. The room was filled with anticipation. He took a slow breath, then stepped up to the microphone. "There's something I need to say," he began. "Something overdue." His eyes scanned the faces in the room, executives, analysts, investors, before settling on the back row, where Mr. Clark sat silently. "Not long ago, someone in this company told me they felt invisible," Nathan continued. "And they were right, because I made them feel that way." A hush fell over the room. Nathan saw Mr. Clark give a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It gave him strength. "But I've learned something since then. I've learned about the extraordinary people who work here, not just to earn a paycheck, but to give this place its soul. People who uphold this company every day with quiet dedication and pride." He turned toward the back of the room, eyes locked. "Mr. Raymond Clark, would you join me on stage?" The room stilled. Heads turned, chairs creaked. Slowly, Mr. Clark stood. His steps were deliberate, grounded, not seeking the spotlight, but not avoiding it either. His expression was one of humility, not surprise. 27 years ago, Nathan said as Mr. Clark reached the stage. "I was a kid in foster care, no future, no family, just a lost boy in a crowded system. This man, then a quiet volunteer, saw something in me, even when I couldn't see it myself." Nathan turned fully toward the crowd. "He set up a scholarship fund, anonymously, that covered my entire education, from undergrad to grad school. Every step of my path he paved it in silence, never once asking for recognition." A ripple of disbelief swept the room. Some board members leaned forward, stunned. Everything I've built, everything Cole Technologies has become, began with this man's belief in one broken boy. And he didn't do it for glory. He did it because he believed every kid deserves the chance to unlock their potential. He turned to face Mr. Clark again. Today, our operations team proposed laying off Mr. Clark to cut costs. They saw a number on a spreadsheet, but I see the foundation of everything we've ever stood for. Applause burst across the room, but Nathan raised a hand to quiet it. Effective immediately, he announced. I'm proud to establish the Raymond Clark Excellence Scholarship Fund with an initial endowment of $50 million to support youth in foster care and transitional housing. The room gasped. And if he accepts, I'd like to appoint Mr. Clark as our new Director of Corporate Culture and People Relations, helping us rebuild the bridge between leadership and the heartbeat of this company, our employees. For a moment, Mr. Clark stood still. Then he stepped toward the mic, hands calm. I never wanted recognition, he said slowly. But if this helps more kids like Nathan, I accept. This time, the applause shook the walls. Nathan saw tears on faces of workers, executives, even a few board members, who now looked ashamed of what they'd merely done. 6 months later, Nathan stood in the lobby of a gleaming new education center, built on the grounds where Sunshine Group Home once stood. The sign read, "The Raymond Clark Learning Center for Tomorrow's Leaders." Inside were computer labs, maker spaces, quiet study rooms, designed for foster youth transitioning to adulthood. Mr. Clark, now in a crisp cardigan and khakis, stepped out from his office, looking more like a college professor than the janitor he once was. But it wasn't the clothes, it was the energy. There was light in his step now, purpose in every movement. Our first group starts Monday, he said, joining Nathan to watch final construction on the courtyard. The 15 kids, ages 16 to 18, will be tutoring, prepping for college, teaching trade skills, and providing emotional support for their transition. And financially, Nathan asked, are we sustainable? Mr. Clark smiled. The Raymond Clark Fund has gained new partners. Your story reminded others where they came from. We've raised over $200 million, 0 cents, and 3 other cities are already planning to build centers just like this one. But the change didn't stop there. At Cole Technologies, culture had transformed. Every employee now had access to direct monthly meetings with Nathan. Coffee with the CEO replaced sterile quarterly reviews. Nathan made it a priority to walk every floor, visit every team, learn every name. Not everyone agreed. Some board members resigned, but productivity soared. Stock prices hit record highs. Investors saw not just returns, but a company that valued people. One afternoon, Mr. Clark beckoned Nathan to a wall near the entrance of the learning center. There, displayed not in marble or metal, were photographs not of donors or executives, but of children. Kids with cautious smiles, tentative hope, and eyes that still dared to dream. Beneath each photo, a name, an age, and a dream. Aerospace engineer, chef, social worker, teacher, founder, healer, artist. Nathan stood in silence, eyes misting. He saw his younger self in every one of them. Not as a CEO, not as a tech mogul, but as a boy once held together by the belief of one man. And now, that belief had become a legacy. This girl, Mr. Clark said, pointing to a photo of a young girl with a serious expression, wants to be a software engineer. She's teaching herself to code at the library. He moved his hand to the next. And this boy, he's obsessed with renewable energy, keeps asking about solar panels. Honestly, some of his questions stump even me. Nathan looked at their faces, some tentative, others full of fire, and in the glint of their eyes, he saw himself. A kid with nothing but a quiet desperation and a sliver of hope. They remind me of someone I used to know, Nathan murmured. Mr. Clark nodded softly. "I say, every child here carries the same spark you once did. They just need someone to believe in them long enough until they can believe in themselves." At the entrance, a group of reporters were adjusting cameras and checking mics. The dedication ceremony was about to begin. Nathan's stomach turned, the old nerves creeping in at the thought of public speaking. Mr. Clark placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Still get nervous before a speech?" he teased gently. Nathan chuckled. "Some things never change, but I think I'm starting to get better." "You're doing just fine," Mr. Clark said, his voice steady with pride. "Your speech last week to the board, David would have been proud." Nathan paused. That was the first time Mr. Clark had spoken his son's name in reference to his success. It landed with weight. A quiet benediction. "Mr. Clark," Nathan said, glancing over as the ceremony countdown ticked closer. "There's something I need to tell you. I spent my whole life trying to be worthy of the belief of a stranger. But now I know it was never a stranger. It was you. And I finally understand something I never did before." "Would said." Nathan's voice grew softer, reverent. "You didn't just pay for my education. You gave me something far more valuable. You gave me the knowledge that I mattered to someone, that someone out there believed in me, without needing to be seen. For a kid who had lost everything, that belief changed everything." Mr. Clark's eyes glistened, the light catching just enough to make the emotion visible. "And now," he said gently, "you're giving that gift back to the next generation." Nathan turned to him. "No, we are giving it back." He paused, then added, "This was never just my story, Mr. Clark. It's ours. And now, it belongs to them." Together they stepped forward into the courtyard, where cameras flashed and reporters leaned in. But this time, Nathan didn't walk alone. He wasn't the abandoned boy anymore. He wasn't the distant CEO. He was the bridge, the one opening doors. And those children, those young faces filled with cautious optimism, would never have to wonder again if someone believed in them. Because from today on, they'd know Don was already waiting, holding the door open, until they were ready to walk through it. If this story stirred something within you, please share it, and subscribe to Moments of Quiet Truth, where every quiet story holds the power to change a life. Because the human spirit is never truly defeated, only waiting for a reason to rise.